During the Depression, the WPA Works Progress Administration commissioned the writing of guidebooks on each of the, at that time, 48 states. Excerpts follow of parts of the Missouri guidebook that mention Mark Twain or have a direct connection with Mark Twain. The guidebook was published in 1941. Its full title was Missouri, the WPA Guide to the Show Me State. This is part 1. The growth of Hannibal brought with it the establishment of the Hannibal Commercial Advertiser in 1837. And during the 1840s, Joseph P. Ament moved his Missouri Courier from Palmyra to that thriving river port. About 1848, Ament employed as printer's devil 13-year-old Sam Clemens, the future Mark Twain, who soon became an office favorite and, as Miss Minnie Brashear says, a sort of sub-editor. When the telegraph was extended to Hannibal during the last year of the Mexican War, Sam was put in charge of the war extras. In 1850, he left the Courier to work with his brother Orion on his newly established Western Union, a weekly Whig paper. 2 years later, when this paper combined with another local organ to become the Hannibal Journal, Sam became assistant editor and set about enlivening the paper with new features and spicy local articles. In spite of Mark Twain's later ungenerous comments, Orion seems not only to have recognized and encouraged his brother's talents, but to have had amazing patience with his many newspaper indiscretions. During Orion's absence in September of 1852, Sam climaxed the summer's jousting with the editor of a rival paper by publishing a crude woodcut he had made of that gentleman's abortive attempt to commit suicide over a love affair by wading into Bear Creek. Later, Mark Twain reported, perhaps incorrectly, the results. Higgins dropped in with a double-barrel shotgun early in the forenoon. When he found out that it was an infant, as he called me, that had done him the damage, he simply pulled my ears and went away. But he threw up his situation that night and left town for good. While Orion was out of town during March of 1853, Sam published a poem called Love Concealed, with the subtitle, To Miss Katy of Hannibal. This in intent was harmless enough, but the subtitle was too long for the column, and Hannibal was reduced to HL with startling results. For once the Hannibal Journal was in demand, Mark Twain recalled, and actually booked an unparalleled number of 33 subscribers. Later, 17-year-old Sam made his debut as editor of Our Assistant's column, writing spicy comments and puns on local happenings, notices of spiritualistic activities, bits of satire on human foibles, and ambitious selected material. On May 26, 1853, he left Hannibal for St. Louis, where he hoped to earn money for a ticket to New York. Orion seems to have missed his assistant. Late in September, he sold the journal to William T. Legg. In the year the conflict ended, Mark Twain, Samuel Langhorne Clemens, 1835 to 1910, whose career as journeyman printer, steamboat pilot, reporter, and assistant editor, see newspapers in Hannibal, had taken him from Hannibal, Missouri to St. Louis, New York, Philadelphia, Keokuk, Cincinnati, and eventually Sacramento. Published a humorous tale, Jim Smiley and the Jumping Frog, in the New York Saturday Press. The war-worn public responded instantly to the Westerner's wit. The story was reprinted throughout the country. Twain's first book, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County and Other Sketches, appeared in 1867. Among his works dealing with the West are Roughing It, 1872, which describes his wanderings in this region. Life on the Mississippi, 1883, which harks back to his steamboating days, and the classics Tom Sawyer, 1876, and Huckleberry Finn, 1884, which have a Missouri and Mississippi Valley background. Mark Twain's robust language came from the vitals of Western life. American writers have found it easier to write of America since his day. Passages like the following from Huckleberry Finn cleared the way for the development of a fluid prose related to common speech and plain people. Once or twice of a night we could see a steamboat slipping along in the dark, and now and then she would belch a whole world of sparks up out of her chimneys, and they would rain down in the river and look awful pretty. Then she would turn a corner, and her lights would wink out, and her powwow shut up, and leave the river still again. And by her waves would get to us, a long time after she was gone, and joggle the raft a bit. And after that you couldn't hear nothing, for you couldn't tell how long, except maybe frogs or something. Hannibal, 488, altitude, 20,865 population, is best known as the hometown of Mark Twain, yet it is Missouri's fourth industrial city. Along the banks of the river, with its wooded islands and background of lovely green hills, several landmarks are preserved. Occasionally, the talk of the older inhabitants recalls the days of Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, and Becky Thatcher, and the illusion of Mark Twain's little white town drowsing in the sunlight of a summer morning returns. Yet it is the clatter of railroad shops and the hum of machinery that dominate the town. The rare arrival of a towboat or barge at the municipal wharf, or the passing of a river steamer in the mile-wide current, arouses as much excitement among the citizens on modern Main Street as among visitors who have never known a life dependent on river traffic. Hemmed between the twin bluffs of Mark Twain's Cardiff Hill and Lover's Leap, the city now extends from the original town side, a narrow floodplain near the water's edge, westward along three valleys. The business district lies close to the waterfront, with Main Street, which parallels the river, and Broadway, which extends westward. The principal thoroughfares. Here, particularly along North Main Street, are several brick and frame business structures dating from the Mark Twain period. Yet even these, grimy and bedraggled from age and smoke, cannot recall to Hannibal that look of soft and shambling picturesqueness suitable to an old river town, and essential to the St. Petersburg of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, which Julian Street describes in Abroad at Home. South of the business district, along Bear Creek, are the railroad tracks and massive brick buildings of the industrial section, which has developed since the decline of the earlier river traffic. Here are the principal props of modern Hannibal: the Burlington railroad shops, the shoe factory, a stove foundry, a railroad car wheel plant, and lesser establishments. Quiet, tree-bordered streets traverse the lower or eastern residential section. On the tangled dividing ridges between the valleys, the houses perch at the top of long flights of steps. Westward, within what must once have been an easy buggy ride, are the homes of Hannibal's original well-to-do families. Set back on expansive lawns and half hidden by maple and sycamore trees, these houses are of the rambling types popular in the Midwest between 1850 and 1890. Nearby, a less well-kept residential area mingles an impression of quiet age with the contemporary note of modern homes. In the 1860s, when the lumber industry demanded strong, unskilled labor, approximately 40% of Hannibal's population was Negro. When the lumber era passed, most of these Negroes were set adrift economically. A few remained as domestic servants or to work in the heavy industries. Today, their descendants make up 8.8% of Hannibal's population. In past years, Hannibal was a typical Mississippi River town, and Until recently, it was also a typical hometown. It took the pressure off outside curiosity to make its people conscious of the lofty stature of the Mark Twain memory. Now the town has erected a museum and scattered markers to remind the visitor that it was to Hannibal that the Clemens family moved from Florida, Missouri in 1839, when Samuel was still a child. Here he experienced many of the incidents of Tom Sawyer's career, the river life, the cave and cemetery escapades, and the youthful romance. Here, too, he served his printer's apprenticeship as a shortcut to an education. Hannibal has also been the home of other noted Americans. Admirals Robert E. Kuntz was born and reared here and is buried in Mount Olivet Cemetery. John Rogers, famed as a sculptor, modeled his first work from the clay of Lover's Leap when he was still a mechanic in the railroad shops. Carroll Beckwith, noted portrait painter, was a native of Hannibal. Cliff Edwards, better known as Ukulele Ike, and Egbert Van Alstyne, composer of Memories and In the Shade of the Old Apple Tree, spent their early years in this town. Like other towns on the Mississippi, Hannibal owes its early growth to the river trade. In 1818, the site of Hannibal was granted to Abraham Byrd of New Madrid in exchange for property destroyed by the New Madrid earthquake of 1811. The following year, a group of land speculators platted a town at the mouth of Bear Creek, which they named Hannibal, in the classic fashion of the period. They then held a sale of lots in St. Louis. The establishment of a post road and mail service from Louisiana to Palmyra brought a gradual increase of cabins in the settlement. By 1827, Hannibal had 5 families. In 1830, it consisted of 30 souls. For a time, the overwhelming magnificence, on paper, of Marion City threatened to snuff out the flickering light of the village. But Marion City did not materialize, and the growth of Hannibal was put on a sound basis by the formation of the Hannibal Company and the incorporation of the town in 1838 under trustees who sold property at low prices, chiefly to actual settlers. Before long, flatboats laden with Iowa grain and hemp tied up at the waterfront, hogs fattened in the back country were driven in for market, logs were floated down from Wisconsin and Minnesota and converted into boards. A pork packing plant was established. Tobacco factories, flour mills, and sawmills flourished. The schoolhouse was erected in 1830. Samuel Stone started a ferry in 1832. A library was organized, and the Commercial Advertiser was established in 1837. The town's growth was marked by such milestones. In 1847, the local newspaper boasted that during the past season, steamboats had carried downstream from Hannibal's port freight valued at more than $1,200,000. Fully established as a place of importance, Hannibal eased into the complacent life of a river town. Once a day, a packet arrived upstream from St. Louis and another downstream from Keokuk. Years later, Mark Twain would picture the town. The streets empty, or pretty nearly so. 1 or 2 clerks sitting in front of the Water Street stores with their splint-bottomed chairs tilted back against the wall, chins on breasts, hats slouched over their faces, asleep. A sow and a litter of pigs loafing along the sidewalk, doing a good business in watermelon rinds and seeds. 2 or 3 lonely little freight piles scattered about the levee. A pile of skids on the slope of the stone-paved wharf, and the fragrant town drunkard asleep in the shadow of them. Presently, dark smoke would appear above one of the remote river points, and instantly a Negro drayman, famous for his quick-eye and prodigious voice, lifts up the cry, "Steamboat a-comin'!" and the scene changes. The town drunkard stirs, the clerks wake up, a furious clatter of drays follows, every house and store pours out a human contribution, and all in a twinkling, the dead town is alive and moving. Drays, carts, men, boys all go hurrying to a common center, the wharf. Assembled there, the people fasten their eyes upon the coming boat as upon a wonder they are seeing for the first time. And the boat is a rather handsome sight, too. She is long and sharp and trim and pretty. 10 minutes later, the steamer would be underway, and after 10 more minutes, the town is dead again, and the town drunkard asleep by the skids once more.